Chad with Versamatic here. Today we're going to be installing an air-in kit into an E40 bolted metallic pump. As you can see, we have an E2 bolted metallic and an E3 bolted metallic. The same process is used when installing the air-in kit for all three pumps. As you can see out front, we have genuine Versamatic repair kits of air valve, wet end, and pilot valve kits that can be used to rebuild the entire pump.
Identifying which kit is required for your repair has become easier on newer pumps with the permanently affixed metal serial number tag that now indicates the wet end and air-in kit information for the pump. Kit information can also be found in the service and operating manual. Versamatic genuine replacement parts, wet end and air-in kits provide a bill of material of the components included in the kit. All items included in the kits are components that Versamatic recommends replacing when rebuilding a pump. The pump we are using today is an example of the ease of installation. Always consult your respective service and operating manual before performing any maintenance on your pump. Service and operating manuals include composite repair parts drawings, repair parts list, and torque specifications. For service and operating manuals and more information, visit us on the web at www.versamatic.com. Always remember that safety is the highest priority. When working on or around any equipment, always follow the correct safety procedures. Always read and follow the safety warnings and instructions in the service manual before any work is started on the pump. For more information, see the warm-up video on safety at Versamatic.com.
The pump we are using in this presentation has been built new and is considerably easier to work with than a pump that has been used in a process. Additional time may be required in the preparation and separation of parts and components during the rebuild. The rebuild you're going to see is accurate in man, method, and machine, but for video purposes, some phases of the work performed have been condensed in time. At any point during the presentation, please pause this video until you have completed any phase of the process.
These are the tools being used for the E40, and while the sizes will change based on the 2-inch and the 3-inch pumps, the type will remain the same. 1/2-inch combination wrench, 9/16 combination wrench, 12-inch pry bar, O-ring pick, torque wrench, grease, 1/2-inch drive ratchet, 3/8 drive ratchet, 5/32 Allen wrench, snap ring pliers, 1.25" socket, 9/16 deep well socket, 1/2-inch deep well socket, 7/16 deep well socket, 3/8 deep well socket.
Alright, let's get started. First we're going to remove the discharge manifold from the E40. And just for ease of maintenance and the video purposes, we're going to use a cordless impact gun.
We're going to go ahead and remove the air valve assembly. Once the air valve assembly is removed, go ahead and set it aside for repair later. Go ahead and turn the pump upside down so we have a flat surface to work with on our outer chambers. Now we're going to remove the suction manifold. Now set the suction manifold aside and remove the suction side seats and check valves. Now we're ready to remove one outer chamber, and we're going to repeat this process for the second side. We'll use our sockets to remove the diaphragm assembly. This may be difficult after a pump is in use. Set aside the outer plate. Remove the old diaphragm. Remove the inner plate and the plastic washer. Now we can remove the second diaphragm assembly with the diaphragm rod attached. Now we're going to remove both inner chambers and set them aside for later reassembly. Scraping or removal of chamber to center block gaskets may be required on older units. Now we'll remove one O-ring from the bumper O-ring on the pilot shaft spool. You can also cut this off because we're going to replace this with a new O-ring. Once we get the O-ring removed, we can go ahead and push the pilot shaft out and set aside for later reassembly. Now we're ready to use a set of snap ring pliers to remove the snap ring from the pilot sleeve. Press the sleeve out. You may need a socket to do so. Once the sleeve is removed, go ahead and inspect for any significant scarring or scratching. Then we're going to use an O-ring pick to remove the main shaft O-rings. Once the main shaft O-rings are removed, inspect the center bushings for scratches, scarring, worn egg-shaped. Inspect all machine surfaces. You'll want to replace this item as needed. Now we're ready to install our main air valve kit. Go ahead and separate the airing kit and remove all components for installation. First, we're going to install our main shaft O-ring. We're going to put a little grease on there so we don't tear or nick or scar up that O-ring. Make sure you work that O-ring down into the groove. This will be done on both sides. Next, we're going to remove the pilot sleeve O-rings. This is anodized aluminum. You don't want to damage the anodized aluminum and just replace as needed. Here we're using an O-ring pick. Inspect for any damage and replace as needed. Here we're going to put a little grease on the outside of the pilot sleeve for ease of installation of the pilot sleeve O-rings. You want to install all those pilot sleeve O-rings into the appropriate grooves. Installing a little grease on the pilot sleeve O-rings is key to that we don't roll or nick any O-rings when installing into the center block. Go ahead and put a little grease within the center block. Slowly press the pilot sleeve into the center block. Make sure you get it all the way through. Now on the opposite side, install the snap ring using a set of snap ring pliers. It's important that we get the snap ring fully installed and flush against the center block. Go ahead and remove the pilot spool O-rings with an O-ring pick. Once all the O-rings are removed, inspect the pilot spool for any scarring or scratching and replace as needed. Now we're ready to install our pilot spool O-rings, starting from one end. We're going to install all the O-rings but one. We need to leave off one end O-ring for assembly. Once all the O-rings are installed, apply a little grease to all the O-rings to ensure we don't roll, nick, or damage during installation. Slowly press the spool into the pilot sleeve. Once we get the spool installed, go ahead and put the last O-ring on that serves as our bumper O-ring. Now we're ready to install our center block gasket. Ensure that all the ports and bolt holes are lined up on our gasket to the center block. Now we're ready to install our air chamber. Also inspect the machine surfaces on the air chamber and the radius. Make sure we get all the ports lined up. Go ahead and bolt down the air chamber in a star pattern and torque to the recommended torque value listed in the service manual. Go ahead and repeat this procedure for the opposite inner chamber. Next, we're going to want to put a little grease on the main shaft to ensure we don't damage the main shaft O-ring. When you install the main shaft with the diaphragm assembly on one side, be sure to align the bolt holes with the inner chamber. Once the bolt holes are aligned, we're ready to install the outer chamber. Inspect the machine surfaces in the radius and dress up with emery cloth or crocus cloth. Also on the machine surfaces on the suction side and the discharge side of the outer chamber. Know the orientation of the pump, ensuring that the discharge port of the outer chamber is aligned with the air valve assembly. Now we can begin to tighten down the outer chamber on one side. And you want to tighten these bolts down in a star pattern so we bring it down evenly and don't damage the outer chamber. Now we're ready to install the diaphragm assembly on the opposite side. First, we'll install our plastic washer. Apply low grease to the inner diaphragm plate to ensure we get a true torque. While any lubricant can be used, hydrocarbons should never be used when installing EPDM parts. Make sure you install the radius towards the diaphragm. Go ahead and invert the diaphragm. Apply a little grease to the outer diaphragm plate, again to ensure a true torque value. Begin to tighten down the diaphragm assembly. Once we have threaded on the outer plate, we can now use a set of pry bars to shift over the diaphragm assembly When shifting over the diaphragm assembly, be sure that the pry bars are located on the inner diaphragm plate so we don't damage the diaphragm. Once you have fully shifted over the diaphragm assembly, you can now roll the diaphragm into a natural shape. Now we're ready to torque the diaphragm assembly. Once you achieve torque, you want to line up all the bolt holes. If the torque is achieved between bolt holes, always go forward, never go backwards. Once the bolt holes are aligned, we're ready to install the opposite outer chamber. Know the orientation of the chamber in relation with the center section of the pump. Now we can bolt down the outer chamber evenly. Go ahead and turn the pump upside down. And we're ready to install the check balls. We're ready to install the valve seats. These valve seats are reversible. Now we're ready to install our suction manifold. These suction manifolds can go either way. Just depends on the pump application. We're ready to bolt down the suction manifold. You want to tighten it down evenly in a star pattern. Now we're ready to rebuild our air valve assembly. First, we're going to remove the end caps. Once the end caps are removed, remove the air valve screen, remove the spool. Once the spool is removed, begin to remove the glide ring assemblies from the spool. Inspect the spool for any damage, scarring, or scratching, and you'll want to replace as needed. Now we're going to press out the main air valve sleeve. Here we're using a socket, something that won't damage the sleeve. Remove the old O-rings from the sleeve. Once the O-rings are removed, inspect the sleeve for any damage, scarring, or scratching, and replace as needed. Now we're ready to install our sleeve O-rings. Go ahead and just slide those over the sleeve and then install grease on these O-rings and apply a light amount of grease inside the air valve body. This is done so we don't roll, nick, or damage any O-rings when slowly pressing in the main air valve sleeve. Install the sleeve within the main air valve body and it's flush with the body. Now we're ready to install the glide ring assembly. First is the O-ring, then the glide rings. Once the glide rings have been installed, install the spool within the sleeve and compress the glide ring assembly as you insert the spool. Once the spool is installed, move the spool back and forth to ensure it moves freely. Install the end cap gasket to ensure that the porting of the gasket is aligned properly. Install the end cap and ensure that the porting is aligned. You want to tighten down the end caps evenly. Once the end caps have been installed, insert the air valve screen. And our rebuild for the air valve assembly is complete. Now we're ready to install our air valve assembly. First is the air valve gasket. This is a one-way gasket and we need to be sure that all the bolt holes and ports are aligned. Take note on the bottom of the air valve assembly, the porting and the bolts. You want to tighten down the air valve assembly evenly. Now we're ready to install our discharge side check balls and seats. Now we're ready to install our discharge manifold. The discharge manifold can be installed in either direction depending on the pump application. Now we're ready to bolt down the discharge manifold. You'll want to tighten it down evenly in a star pattern. If doing a complete rebuild, refer to our wet end kit installation video.
This concludes our rebuild of an airing kit for an E40 bolted metallic pump. Our kit included pilot valve assembly O-rings, main air valve assembly O-rings, glide rings, and gaskets. While the pumps are different in size and flow, the techniques and procedures used in the rebuild of the E40 bolted pump are also applied to the commonality of the E2 and E3 bolted pump. For more information, visit our website, Versamatic.com, or email after-sales support at service.versamatic@idexcorp.com.